Sorbo show. Today, I've got a lot to get through, and I have a guest. We're going to talk about the Gina Carano situation on Twitter and the fact that the mob is canceling her. I have some other updates about that. Also, the beginning of the fight back, which I'm encouraging people to engage in. I got a book update on my new #1 bestseller on Amazon, my book. But first, my guest is Laura Kelly. She is a lawyer, and she's representing a woman who is suing a governor over her son's death. And her son sadly took his own life. And Laura Kelly is the legal representative for the woman who is suing Governor. Is it Governor Pritzker?
Hello?
Oh, there you are. Okay. Welcome to the show. Is it Governor Pritzker that she's suing?
Yeah, I'm suing Governor Pritzker. Yes.
Yeah, you're suing on behalf of your clients.
Exactly.
So I watched a really, and just by way of introduction,
yeah.
I'll say that Laura comes to me through my husband. She reached out to him because she wants to get this story told, and it's a story that I've been telling in a more generalized way for quite a while. The cost of the shutdowns, the cost of the lockdowns on our culture, on our society, on us personally. But Laura came across his desk and he mentioned it to me, and I said, wait, I'll just have her on the show. This is awesome. You did an interview with Tucker Carlson with the mother that we're talking about. And she went into details about her son. Actually, no, it was a Harris Faulkner interview, forgive me. But she went into details about her son, and I was so moved and impressed by, there was a slew of photos. Of course, now, kids grow up with 87,000 times the number of photos that we ever did, but there were so many photos of this young man in all different aspects of life. In other words, he was the captain, no, he was the marshal of the marching band. He was the lead in the high school musical, Music Man. He was in the debate club, the speech club. He was the all around superstar student. He was the guy you hitch your dreams to, right? Especially as a parent, you're like, wow, my kid, whoa, I just can't even wait to see how far he goes. And then he went off to college and during COVID, and he chose specifically to go to a school where it would be a large school where he could branch out, because he came from a fairly small high school and he wanted to branch out into the world, and he was isolated and unable to participate with other people because of the lockdown. And that's when he took his own life. And so there are two reasons that you're doing this lawsuit. I think one is because there's something called retribution, and there needs to be some consequences at the government level for this tragedy. But also you want to make other parents aware of some of the pitfalls that she witnessed but didn't quite understand what they were when she was seeing them. Is that correct?
Yes, I had started hearing all of these stories months ago. It's not, Trevor Till is a remarkable case, but it's actually as amazing as Trevor was. What we are seeing is it's really these super overachiever kids that are maybe among the most vulnerable, because they're so active, they're so immersed in life, they're so passionate. Trevor was the captain of his track team, the lead in his musical, as you mentioned, the head of the president of the Honor Society, the debate team, the drumming, and part of that, and then all of it for him, it just stopped when the lockdowns took place and the restrictions on high school sports and all these other extracurricular activities were imposed. So we started hearing these stories months ago. And in fact, I know of at least 10 other instances of suicides of students in Illinois. And I know that in Nevada, we have at least 19 that I'm aware of, and other states. And since I did this interview with Harris Faulkner and Tucker Carlson in the last week and a half, I have had people from not only across the country, but all over the world contact me about their sons and daughters that have committed suicide. I had a friend that I've known for 20 years reach out to me recently and tell me that her 13-year-old cousin in New York committed suicide in December. And again, it's that same pattern of the super overachiever immersed in life and then can't deal with the COVID isolation because of it, just their lives just stop. And because they're kids, you know, they don't understand that there's a light at the end of the tunnel and that their self-worth isn't just dependent on sports and being the lead in the musical, because they're kids. And if the adults can't deal with these lockdowns and these shutdowns and all this isolation, how can these kids be expected to cope with it? And so they're not. And so we're not just seeing suicides, we're seeing eating disorders and hospitalizations due to depression, and thousands of kids in the sports area not able to go to college because they can't afford to go now because they missed their opportunity to be scouted in their junior and senior years of high school because of the shutdown. In places like Illinois, where there was a shutdown of high school sports in general, not as much in other states, but in states like Illinois. And now all those low income, rural kids and diverse kids are not going to be able to go to college because they missed out on their opportunity to be scouted. So it's all these thousands and thousands and thousands of stories that we keep hearing about.
What about the, and this just occurred to me, what about the kids who are on athletic scholarships, but there's no athletics? Are they still
Able to go to college? You know, I guess it's, you know, all these things are really being negotiated between the colleges and these students, but I would imagine that once they're granted the scholarship, it's hard for the high school to retract, for the college to retract it. Although I would imagine maybe it's put on hold or frozen. I don't know. It's really these are all different situations. But, you know, the crisis is in the mental health area, and parents aren't always aware. If parents are having trouble coping with this, they aren't always aware of what's happening with their kids, and it's traumatic for for families in general. This whole thing is just it's almost incomprehensible. And like, for instance, in Illinois, why it's almost an insult to injury on top of the trauma, the tragedy. But, you know, Governor Pritzker in our state did not put any legal restrictions on professional and college sports. They're allowed to operate and do whatever they want. So there's no restrictions on college and pro sports because they're rich and powerful. The kids just weren't important. And that's why it's worse.
I did read that. And by the way, I'm on your side. I totally agree with you. His answer to that was, well, they have resources that the high schools and colleges don't have.
Right.
That doesn't really pass the smell test, though, does it?
No, it's a circular argument because they may have the resources, but there's no mandates for them to do anything. You know, so, you know, yes, they're very rich and powerful. They could do plexiglass.
Actually making your point for you.
Yeah.
But Laura, they're rich and powerful.
Right.
They fund my campaign. High school and colleges don't fund my campaign.
Right. So who cares about the kids, right? And even now, so as a result of our lawsuit, people are saying, because we filed in December, and now all of a sudden in January, all the sports have just opened back up again right here, you know, so, but with restrictions, right? So all the high schools and schools have all these incredible restrictions on how they play, you know, and that, again, the colleges and the professional sports do not have any restrictions on how they play. They are allowed to determine what they should do and what they think is responsible, but again, no restrictions. That's why when you watch pro sports, you see, you know, Super Bowl, no masks, all this kind of stuff. They're allowed to determine what's safe for them. And the same with, you know, businesses in Illinois and in other states. It's like, okay, you know, how does the state define what an essential business is? Well, in Illinois, an essential business is a pot dispensary. It's a liquor store, you know. But
not a church.
Right, not a church, right? Exactly. So restrictions on churches, but pot dispensaries, A-okay.
I want to see the science on that. I'd love to see a scientific study that determines the essentiality of a business. I just made up a word, essentiality. I like it.
I think it's a great word, you know. And but no, you're absolutely right. And so this is what we've seen this with churches. We've seen this with any religious activity. We've seen this with holidays. We've seen this how Christian holidays, how they're celebrated. And yet, people can go in Chicago during the height of the pandemic, despite the restrictions on churches. Mayor Lightfoot here opened up Grant Park to 20,000 protesters. But yet churches weren't allowed to pray. People weren't allowed to pray at church. They weren't allowed to congregate. So I think people don't understand why some people are being discriminated against and some people are given special rights and privileges. If the pandemic is so severe, why are we doing this to kids and families and churches and people? Why are we doing this?
Well, I mean, it does beg the question, how severe is the pandemic? And, it reminds me of a fairy tale story. Yeah. Where you weren't allowed to go outside. And the only reason you weren't allowed to go outside is because the tyrant in the story didn't want you to discover that outdoors was really great. And so he just convinced everybody that outdoors was really dangerous. And so don't go outside. In fact, there's a movie about that too. I think The Croods has sort of shadows of that playing through it, that you can't go out because it's too dangerous outside. And then they eventually go outside and they go, oh my gosh, there's a whole world out here and it's marvelous. And right. So part of me is wondering, I mean, okay, I don't like to go down the sort of conspiracy theory pathways. Yeah. However, when they allow it for some and not allow it for others, and there's no test regarding the pandemic at all applied, it's a political test. Yeah. Then I go, okay, I cry foul. I smell something in that. So
the other thing but you're not wrong in any of that, and I agree. It makes you wonder, but I think also when you start looking at data, it also has to make you wonder. I mean, the reason that the World Health Organization changed its methodology on cycle thresholds and PCR testing sensitivity. And now, we're also seeing, that then all that brought the rates down, or did it, and how did it change how hospitals reported their data to the state that then determines the policy? I mean, these are basic questions that should be answered,
On the eve of the inauguration, they're like, you know what, let's change the way we actually record the data. Yeah. Let's change the parameters.
Well, yeah, I mean, and by the way, again, you're not wrong. I mean, this is a rational person, a reasonable person would and should be able to ask those questions and get them answered. I mean, this is not conspiracy theory stuff if it's in all these scientific journals. I have a very wise friend who feeds me a lot of this data and who breaks it down for me because I'm not a scientist. But any reasonable person would start asking questions when you start getting this kind of data. And the other thing is, I just heard this, I don't know if it's true or not, but now that I've heard that the amount of testing has also gone down. So we ramped up testing, if you start decreasing testing, well, of course, you're not going to have as many infections if you stop testing. You start decreasing testing levels, then you're not going to have as many infections, right?
It's so absurd. I mean,
if that's true, but I marvel at how we have allowed these government bureaucrats who are not scientists and then to create the policy. And the other thing that I'm just shocked about is that these state legislatures have ceded their authority to these governors without pushing back on these restrictions. Like in Illinois, we really have had this, and so many other states, but our legislatures should be saying, we should be creating these policies together. That's what the point of this is. That's why we have division of powers and separation of powers.
We weren't taught, Laura, you're touching on a very profound issue. Yeah. That is the issue of education. And these people, because our education system is so degraded from where it was, these people didn't learn the role of government. Half of them probably can't tell you how government is supposed to function. And
or they don't care.
or they're enjoying what's happening. And there's a lot of that. I mean, I remember when Obama said, I've got a pen and I've got a phone. If you're not going to pass the laws that I want. And all the Democrats standing up and cheered. And I remember because I was on the air and I said, do they not understand they're cheering their demise? They're applauding their eventual, ouster, because who needs lawmakers or legislators if your president can just be a tyrant, right? And
Right.
these, so
Well,
these,
if you have people who don't respect the Constitution and they don't respect the notion of law and they think that law is there to be manipulated and that the Constitution is just a paper document and it's outdated and outmoded and it doesn't mean anything, then you don't care if you twist the meaning of it and its original intents and purposes. And that's really what we're seeing. And it's a really scary time because there's this complete suspension of constitutional rights depending on who you are and what you say and what you believe. But even if you don't say anything, we're seeing that these, state governors are really going after just everybody, families who are not political, kids who are just trying to live their lives. That's what we're seeing. And, we're getting calls from all over the country now, people calling Remember America and asking us for legal help. And, we don't have the resources to help everybody. We're trying to raise money to help more people. But, we, want to help people. That's kind of why we started doing this. And, people like this lawsuit in Illinois is a very simple one. This is a basic equal protection lawsuit. I mean, it's almost like a slam dunk. I mean, despite the politics of the state.
so before you move on from that, because you are a lawyer, and so I do want to talk about the lawsuit just a little bit. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but I want to understand the mechanics of it. What exactly are you suing for? What do you want out of it? And how do you go? What's the strategy? How do you go about getting it?
Well, so our lawsuit is a very basic one. It's very simple. We kept it simple because we've seen in these suits is that they're like doing these 150-page motions to dismiss that we can't respond to. It's like, they've got like 10, 20 lawyers on their team against like our handful. So it's like it's the movie 300, but with lawyers. But our lawsuit basically says that Governor Pritzker violated the equal protection rights of high school students by discriminating against them in favor of college and pro sports where there are no legal restrictions on them, and yet he canceled for a year high school sports, and there was immense harm that was done. Wrongful death of Trevor Till, the other suicides in the state, the depression, the eating disorders, and all the lost sports scholarship opportunities, basically destroying the futures of thousands and thousands of kids. And in Illinois, we have a very expansive view of equal protection law. It goes way beyond the strict scrutiny standard of federal law, where you have to have a protected class like a racial classification, and it has to involve a fundamental right like the right to vote. So, on the federal level, we wouldn't have much cause to make that argument. But in Illinois, it's different. In Illinois law prohibits the legislature creating special classifications of similarly situated people and then not having a rational basis to discriminate against one class versus another. So a very open and shut case here. We've got college and pro sports allowed to do whatever they want, operating, playing, performing without any legal restrictions. And then you got high school students who not only did all these high schools submit mitigation plans to the state of Illinois, but they were just completely ignored. So not only were they canceled, but they had mitigation plans and they weren't allowed to even pursue them despite having a plan. So two sets of people treated differently without a rational basis. The governor has still not answered our motion for summary judgment. That's over 30 days ago. So now it's a procedural cat fight. So now the governor is desperately trying to transfer our case out of LaSalle County to Sangamon County, where he's been getting favorable rulings. And now the judge in that case, and the chief judge in Sangamon, rejected jurisdiction and called Governor Pritzker out for forum shopping, so judge shopping, right? Which is really shocking in Illinois to see a judge with that kind of courage. You don't always see that. And now Governor Pritzker is going to the Illinois Supreme Court and he's filed a motion against the judge to force the judge to accept jurisdiction. We have filed a motion in support of the judge in the Illinois Supreme Court. So now this is a cat fight in the Illinois Supreme Court. All because Governor Pritzker decided he wanted to discriminate against thousands and thousands and thousands of high school students.
Wow.
One case. This is one case.
Well, there were a couple shocking things. The judge who called him out and said, hey, you can't just shop this around, was from, you said, from the jurisdiction where he had been getting favorable rulings, right?
The chief judge in that county.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
How, what are your chances that, because you're at the Supreme Court of Illinois state level, right?
Yes.
What are your chances there, do you think?
Well, obviously, it's a Democrat majority court, but by a slim margin. They're up for re-election in 2022, three of them. One of them, and basically in a shocker situation, one of the judges in that Supreme Court lost his retention bid last year in a really amazing, it's a historic event. No Supreme Court justice in Illinois, I think, has ever lost his retention bid. So his seat is up now in 2022. So I think all the eyes are on the Illinois Supreme Court about whether they're going to support Governor Pritzker's judge shopping strategy or whether they're going to rule in favor of the people. But I also think the judges in Sangamon County, as a result of that chief judge's courage, great courage, now are on notice that people are watching this case and they're waiting to see if there's going to be fairness, if they're going to abide by the Constitution, if they're going to abide by the huge body of case precedent in Illinois that supports, that prohibits this kind of discrimination against similarly situated classes of people. So, I mean, we have a very long body, a strong body of law that says we should win this case. And so people are watching, and I think that puts pressure on the Supreme Court, and I think it also puts pressure on all these judges in Sangamon County, where honestly, after this chief judge did such a courageous thing, we might actually get a favorable ruling in Sangamon. You know, I mean, we actually might, as a result of the pressure and the courage of this judge, we might actually get a favorable ruling now, or at least a just one. You know,
but
fairness.
It sounds like you've got two different things now. The case of judge shopping, but that's not a case. That's just an accusation, right?
Well, it's in the judge's order that he's denying jurisdiction over this judge shopping. Yes, so it's more than a scolding. It's actually in the order that he's denying jurisdiction due to forum shopping.
So where does that,
So now, just so technically speaking, so now Governor Pritzker has filed with his legal team a motion for leave to file a mandamus complaint against the judge for abusing his discretion. His argument is the judge abused his discretion in rejecting jurisdiction. We have argued in support of the judge. Now the Supreme Court will then rule on that issue, and we'll either go back to LaSalle County for our motion for summary judgment and to answer Governor Pritzker's motion to dismiss, which he's filed after our motion for summary judgment, or we will go to Sangamon County and have this argued. Yeah, one or both of those should be argued. Now, in theory,
so the Supreme Court is going to say where the case will be argued about the unlawful discrimination.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
It does get in the weeds, and as much as I love it, I think that sometimes other people's ears might sort of gloss over.
Oh yeah, no, I understand, but you know, it is. I mean, these procedural catfights are complicated, but this is very political now. I mean, this
it was political to begin with, right? Let's not mention
it was political to begin with, but it's so openly political now as a result of this procedural issue.
Well, and what we've seen, interestingly, in the past, I would say 2 months, is that they're shedding they're wolves in sheep's clothing, right? They're shedding the sheep's clothing, and they're just being wolves, and they're saying, yes, it's political. I mean, the WHO changing their testing standards literally the day of the inauguration. You know, they don't even care anymore. It's like, yes, it's political. Do you think the pandemic is a political action? Yes, it's political. Like, of course, and they're not shy about it. And Pritzker, you know, of course he's going to judge shop. Oh, and by the way, don't try to tell him not to. And so we're now in a position in this country of either saying, okay, it's political and they won, and so they just win, and now they'll win all the time, or saying, no, that's not what this was supposed to be about.
Right.
And I think that, of course, I believe that we have to put the finger out now and say, no, it's enough already. Young people are dying, people with promising futures. I mean, hearing that mother tell her story about how fantastic a young man she had raised. And I mean, I'm a mother, I have 3 children, and my heart breaks for her. And it breaks for all the kids out there who are suffering because these restrictions have no scientific basis. In fact, the entire social distancing, wearing a mask, sort of that entire what is it? Prescription was concocted by some high school students overseas, or basically, let's try that. Let's just stab at things in the dark and see if we hit anything. It's absurd.
Well, I mean, the other aspect of it is that all the other diseases that we're not catching because of these lockdowns and restrictions for people. I just heard a case the other day. Someone just called me, and because she didn't, this poor lady didn't get tested because she couldn't get tested because they weren't allowing testing. They didn't catch her breast cancer. And so she had to have an operation in order to remove, for her, she had to have an operation.
Right.
And I mean, they could have, had she been tested, that wouldn't have happened.
So I had a friend who had an injury that she should have gone to the hospital. Luckily, it all worked out okay. But in any other case, she should have gone to the hospital. She had a head injury. She was bleeding profusely.
Yeah.
She didn't go because she was afraid of COVID.
Yeah.
And of course those stories abound. So then my last question on the whole lawsuit thing is, you're representing the mother and you're suing on behalf of the mother
and other parents.
Okay, so that was my question. Are there other people who have joined the lawsuit? And your answer is yes. So on behalf of how many? Do you have a tally? Does it
It's not so this is not a class action. We could have made it a class action, but then there's risks with that. So I pursue very narrow targeted strategies in specific counties. If we had filed as a class action, we would automatically been in Sangamon County. So I was trying to avoid the case going to Sangamon. So we represent 4 parents. We have a list of 2,000 or 3,000 that wanted to join. And so we have the 4 that's basically representing all those other parents, because our case will be precedential value anywhere else in the state of Illinois should we succeed.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you've got a fight ahead of you, clearly, because he's not going to give up easily.
No.
But I wish you luck. It sounds like it's going to be a fairly cut and dry once you get it into the courts, and it sounds like you're going to get a court. I'm hopeful that you'll get a court that is receptive to hearing the argument.
I hope so too. It really is just about fairness. We should be allowed to present our case, and Governor Pritzker and his legal team should be forced to answer our motion for summary judgment. It shouldn't be like, don't just ignore it. Let's at least get an answer. All he has to do is give us a rational basis for why he doesn't have any restrictions on college and pro sports, and why he canceled high school sports. It really shouldn't be that complicated, and yet they don't seem to want to answer that question, which is why we brought it. Remember America Action, which is rememberamerica.org if people want to find me. But that's our website, and people are contacting me through there and sharing their stories, and we're trying to help as many people as we can.
Well, that's awesome. Laura Kelly, thank you so much for being on the program. I will put rememberamerica.org in the notes down below when this goes up. So thanks so much for coming on the program. It's great to see you.
Thank you very much.
All right.